thank you everyone for tuning in and for joining us. So today's session 3, the last of the series, the pandemic, brain injury, the pandemic within a pandemic, strategies and solutions for keeping you connected. So thank you so much to all the panelists for joining us today, as well as thank you to PIA Law and Thomson Rogers for continuing to support us. My name is Madison, and I am the program assistant here at BIST, today's host. And yes, so I'm so happy that everyone is here joining us and tuning in. So let's get started. I just want to point out that there is going to be a question and answer period. So feel free to ask as many questions. Please type any comments into the Q&A box. So you'll see on your screen the Q&A function down at the bottom, somewhere in the center of your screen. So please feel free to insert any of your questions or comments, and we'd be happy to answer those throughout the webinar, as well as towards the end. All right, so let me start on today's panelists. So we have a full set here. So we have David MacDonald, partner and personal and trauma injury lawyer from Thomson Rogers. We have Stacey Stevens, also a partner at Thomson Rogers and as well personal trauma injury lawyer. Matthew Sutton, associate at Thomson Rogers. And we also have Joanna Hamilton, neuropsychologist. She is located in Peterborough. We also have Leigh Craney, rehabilitation case manager. And last but not least, we have Keith Lindsay, service director at Bartimus Rehab Services. All right, so please, Stacey, take it away.
Awesome, thank you, Madison. And thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today. You know, if I said to you 6 months ago, you're gonna wake up one morning and your world as you know it is gonna be gone, would you have believed me? I know I wouldn't have. But the reality is it has. And for the past 6 months, we have isolated ourselves from one another. We've stopped going into work. We have felt alone, confused, depressed, and some of us very fearful of what tomorrow is going to bring. And now, as we get into reopening and getting back to our lives, we're hearing about the new normal. And we're starting to look at ourselves, we're starting to look at our family and our loved ones and wondering, you know, what is this going to look like for me, for my job, for my kids who may be going back to school? And thankfully, we've got, you know, the resiliency, we've got the ability to reason and make sense of the challenges that we have faced during this time, but it hasn't been easy for us. Now, imagine having a traumatic brain injury, and after days, months, or even years of learning to live with your new normal, suddenly in March, you're now plunged into a new normal. Without any warning, your life is turned upside down, only this time you've got little or no ability to be able to cope with these challenges. And the reality that we've seen with our clients is that the COVID pandemic has really exacerbated the physical, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral symptoms that are associated with traumatic brain injury. So social isolation has taken what is already a marginalized sector of our society, removed them from their day programs, removed the rehabs reports, resulting in amplified sense of fear, isolation, confusion. And, you know, depending on the severity of the brain injury, we've got clients who don't understand the scope of the pandemic, who don't understand the need for masks, who don't understand the need for social distancing. And what we have seen, what all of us have seen widespread amongst our clients is a deterioration in their ability to cope, in their ability to function. on, on their normal basis without the treatment and supports in place. They've lost structure and routine and all of these things that our clients have relied on in order to make sense of their day. Left on their own devices, they've got a sense of no control over what happens in their own world. What we have seen happening is that there's increased depression, anger, frustrations, and in some instances, there is abusiveness towards family members, towards their care providers, and many of our clients have left at a risk of self-harm. So today, what we're going to be talking about, my co-panelists and I, are going to talk about our experiences, and we're going to share our stories and some solutions that we hope will help you deal with your own struggles, whether you fall into the category of a rehab provider who's working with someone with a traumatic brain injury, whether you are a family member who has been all of a sudden dropped into the role of caregiver because the PSWs aren't coming in anymore, or if you're a brain injury survivor. And on top of this, on top of the information that we're hoping to share with you today, we've also going to be making available our COVID survival toolkit. And this is a comprehensive list of resources, and I'll just pop it up on my screen so you can take a look at it. There we go. And it is a comprehensive list of resources that you will see. There we go. Will give you different links to various supports, whether it be through, for example, we've got yoga, meditations, we've got podcasts, we've got different groups, different societies. There's about 9 pages of helpful links where we think you'll be able to get the information that you need whenever you have a question that arises. It'll be available on the Thomson Rogers website, the PIA website, the BIS website, and also to be available to be shared on request by email. And I think through our AB reporter that goes out. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Joanna Hamilton.
Thank you, Stacey. And good afternoon, everyone. I hope that everyone here is staying well. Thank you so much for joining us on this late summer sunny afternoon so that we can chat about strategies for dealing with and coping with 2020. You may find as we're talking that there's some overlap between what we, as panelists, what we talk about, but that's okay because repetition is a good thing. So I was driving into the small town near my house this weekend, and I saw a sign that a church had put out in front, and it said this: "Dear God, please uninstall 2020. This version has a virus." How many of us have felt that 2020 needs to be uninstalled or at least skipped? I know I have, and I know that a lot of people that I work with have felt that way too. This year has brought so many quick and intense changes to our lives, and those who are also living with acquired brain injury have had yet another quick and intense change to adjust to. So we know that anxiety increases when we lose our sense of stability, routine, and control. And this year has certainly brought about many disruptions to our lives, as Stacey said. These disruptions are likely to lead many of us to experience high levels of stress and worry. So in the early days of the pandemic, many people I work with were actually telling me, "Ha, welcome to my world. I've been practicing social distancing for years. At least we now have a word for it." I, in fact, had one person tell me right at the beginning that they felt healthier because they weren't having to drive to appointments and were enjoying staying home, attending therapies online. What I found out and what I was reminded of was that many survivors are in fact the experts in this new world in which we find ourselves. So I spoke to them about what worked. And what I was hearing was that what worked was accepting the situation and using strategies like mindfulness and deep breathing and trying to stay focused on here and now. I used that expertise when talking with other people who weren't feeling quite so expert in social distancing. That was at the beginning. But as the length of quarantine continued, I heard increasing levels of stress and anxiety. Comments like, "How much longer? I miss being with others. When will the Brain Injury Association open up again? When can I come back to see you? Not online, but in person. Why is my family still home?" Those kind of comments were increasing. And along with that, as Stacey mentioned, there were increased challenges related to being impulsive. I had a number of people that I work with who are buying things they don't need. I have people getting angry and sometimes violent with family members, not sleeping well, and more emotional, more tears, more yelling. I also was hearing from families and caregivers that they were struggling as well, as they were becoming overwhelmed. What we know is that this year has been very stressful. Levels of anxiety and worry are high and are evident with people struggling more both with behaviors and their ability to cope. That can be even more of a concern when you're living with an injury that also impacts on those areas. But what this year has also taught us is that there are ways to cope and address levels of stress and anxiety. We know that people are resilient and can adapt. Just think of how quickly we all adapted to waiting in line outside grocery stores, standing 6 feet apart. But we do need strategies and support to be able to help us cope with that. We need to be continuously talking about coping strategies and how we can turn our unhealthy ways of coping, like grabbing that extra chocolate bar or reaching for the bag of chips or not talking about things, into healthier ways of coping. So I'm going to talk about some healthy ways of coping today. And I just want to acknowledge Dr. Sachiko Nagasawa, who provided some information at the very beginning of the pandemic about COVID and some strategies. And I found those strategies very helpful when working with people at this time. The first thing I want to talk about is the importance of having good communication and with team members and with family members and people who are living with the effects of brain injury, and that if we all talk together, the good communication is absolutely imperative in helping with stress management and coping. If we can keep talking, we can keep planning and helping. And having regular contact that way is so very important. We feel so very out of control at this time. And so what we need to do is look at where we can find control and how we can control our actions and choices. So this includes such things as taking care of ourselves. I often start conversations with people by asking, have you eaten? Have you slept? Have you exercised? Have you taken your meds? Those things, and I call those my mom questions, are still in our control. They're basic self-care. We can control whether we're eating or sleeping or exercising. We can also make sure that we're doing other things that are in our control, like washing our hands regularly and trying to keep that social distancing, even though I know that can be really hard at times. It's very important for us to stay in touch with each other and for people to stay in touch with family members, their rehab team, and more importantly, finding ways to just stay in touch with the community. So whether that's friends, Brain Injury Association, that's all important. We need to do things that are relaxing for us. And what that could be a number of different things, like having a bath or a shower, going for a walk where we can, be very mindful and aware of what's going on around us, meditating, breathing, staying active like yoga and exercising, and stop watching the news. At the beginning of this pandemic, how many of us were glued to the TV or the radio trying to find out as much as we could of the numbers and what people were telling us to do, and how overwhelming and negative that became. So I had lots of conversations with people about just turning off the news. It's not helpful. The other thing that we can do to help is by focusing on others and doing something kind for someone. that could be simple as saying thank you, buying them a coffee, making something for them, just being kind. A book I read last year, written by the Dalai Lama and Bishop Desmond Tutu, called The Book of Joy, outlines some ideas and some strategies for helping us maintain a positive outlook and being joyful and happy. And in that, they talk about ways to deal with stressful situations. And what they talk about is being able to look at things from a different perspective. So thinking, how can I look at this situation differently? What can I learn from it? They also talk about being grateful. So what can I be thankful for? And then giving back. Where can I show kindness? So these 3 points are definitely parts of conversations that we need to have, and also our ways of coping during stressful times. We need to make a plan for each day to keep a routine in place. Our routines have been so disrupted during this time. We need to identify our goals and how we're going to reach them. What do we need to do, and how are we going to do that? That's what works in these times, is keeping that routine, identifying goals, and making plans. Now, what doesn't work? Well, first off, avoiding the current situation by not thinking about it or immersing ourselves in other activities may help for a bit, but they're generally not helpful ways of coping. Using substances to cope and getting angry are also not helpful. While it might be tempting to play games online all day or just sit on social media, we need to find other ways of coping. We need to spend time thinking about, how do we deal with strong emotions, and how do we generally cope with them? First of all, a step might be to think about how our bodies react physically when we are feeling stressed and tense. Are our muscles tense? Do we have butterflies in our tummy? Are we pacing? Then we can label that feeling. If we're feeling anxious, we may be feeling butterflies in our tummies. If we're pacing, we may be feeling upset, frustrated. If our muscles are tense, it might be anger. Then we need to think about what that feeling is telling us we need. So if we're feeling anxious, we need to focus on finding comfort. If we're feeling sad, we need support. And if we're angry, we need to learn to set limits and boundaries. We need to check in with ourselves a couple of times a day and say, how am I feeling? What am I doing? It's also really important to remember that we are not our feelings, and that feelings don't last forever. They do change. One very wise person that I worked with years ago told me this: it will be what it will be for as long as it is, and then it won't. That's very true. The feelings we have today won't always last. So one way of coping with our feelings is actually to track the feelings we have during a day. That way we can get a visual to see that I was anxious yesterday, but I'm not anxious today. I feel less anxious. We need to move from resisting our feelings and our emotions to finally getting to the place where we can ask ourselves what we can learn from them. So managing levels of stress, we need to focus on what works. We need to do things that are active for us and soothing. So active things include physical activity, completing chores, connecting with others, and soothing activities are those relaxing things that we find, like having a bubble bath, relaxing, breathing, yoga, and meditation. I think it's important to pick both an active and a soothing activity for each day. And remember that what works for you may not work for someone else, but having something to do keeps a routine in place. We need to have help from others, like rehab support workers, family members, or friends to help us with that. As this year has led to higher levels of stress and emotions, we need to also look at ways to reduce the intensity of the emotions we are experiencing. So again, as much as possible, being active. Focus on something that needs to get done and do it. Focus on someone else again, so that you're not focusing always on what you're on yourself. Think about times where you felt differently, experienced different emotions. So one thing we tried that I was working with at the beginning of the pandemic, we called it in my office the Covet Giggle. And what we would do is we would try to find a funny video or a meme or a song or something on social media that people were posting online. That was happening a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, and we would watch that. So one of the things that a lot of people I was working with were watching were Pluto the dog, the schnauzer from Montreal, or that Sound of Music video that was redone with the COVID-19 safety measures put in place. And it was a way to laugh and feel better. It is also okay to push away a little bit and not think about what's going on, but just not for too long. We need to use strategies like breathing and counting to 10 and things that just help us slow down. We also need to focus on doing something physical, like squeezing a ball or letting ice melt in your hand, things like that that will just provide a different emotion, a different physical feeling than what's going on when we're feeling anxious. One of the things that a lot of people that I'm working with are experiencing are feelings of being more impulsive. So I've had people who've been buying things more than they should be, or buying things they don't need, or being impulsive in terms of being angry and frustrated and lashing out. So one strategy to use is to think of the word stop as a way to cue yourself to stop. So you can use the letters S-T-O-P to stop and think of a plan, or the same words to stop, take a deep breath, observe what you're thinking and feeling, and then plan and proceed. We also need to be very compassionate with ourselves. We need to be encouraging and tell ourselves that we're doing a great job. Remember that you are the expert and you do have coping strategies. We also need to recognize that we're all works in progress, that things are not going to be perfect, but working on strategies will help. We need to develop wellness plans and identify what strategies we use now and what new strategies might be possible for us. Keeping a gratitude journal to note things that you're thankful for is important. And you know what? For those days that seem too overwhelming, it's perfectly okay to say you're thankful that you never have to do that day again. Having people to talk to and connect with during this time is so important because support is vital. We are grateful that the brain injury associations around the province have provided this support during this time. If you need to reach out to someone, do, because working together to develop and refine ways of coping will work. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Happy afternoon. Thanks so much, Dr. Hamilton. I think that I'll speak for David, Stacey, and myself when I say that it's nice to hear from your expertise because it highlights patterns that we've seen on our own files with our own clients. The ones with brain injuries, one of the examples you provided earlier on was that initially you would have some clients that would be happy that the treatments were stopping for a small period of time. It would relax them and let them reevaluate. But then over time, those treatments not being in place started to cause a deterioration. I know Leigh is on the panel here, and I'd like to ask you some questions because you're on the front lines as a case manager, and you're hearing from Dr. Hamilton, and you're hearing from other treatment providers, and some of the stuff that us lawyers have seen in recognizing patterns over the past 6 months is that our clients with brain injuries are deteriorating either with no treatment or different treatment or breaks and breaches in regular treatment. And that certain issues on a case-by-case basis cause additional difficulties. Some people are battling alcohol abuse or problems with family members within the home. Other ones have certain anxieties that are being exacerbated or increased in very serious ways. One of the things that we've noticed at our firm is that they'll begin to focus on a specific thing that bothers them in their life and to the exclusion of everything else. And I'd love to hear from you as a case manager, you know, types of creative solutions you may have when you have a case-by-case basis scenario where perhaps some form of assistance would be very helpful to one brain injured client, but not so much with another in light of their own changing circumstances?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. It's, as you say, it's we've been living the front lines because we have our community. We have large rehab, teams that work with our clients in the brain injury community. We have established, community programs. There's a forward momentum. There's goals. There are measuring progress. And then COVID came and shut it all down. And basically, exactly what you've described. I had a number of clients as well who were happy to check out at the beginning and just happy to be home. And then the decline came. It was very evident because you have trauma and loss and social isolation that's superimposed on someone who's already living that experience of trauma and loss and social isolation. And so it presented a number of challenges, absolutely, as we were trying to deliver rehab supports. So we learned a lot. And so I'm going to take a few minutes and just share our experience from the treatment team point of view and what we've learned and some takeaway messages to take some positive things out of it that we can move forward with. So one of the first things we had to realize initially was that we needed to implement virtual services and supports. Our work with clients has been very much in person, in the community, that direct support. And very quickly, COVID shut everyone down. We weren't prepared, our clients weren't prepared. And so we very quickly had to learn how to deliver virtual supports. And when I was reflecting back on our journey, I kind of identified a few phases in developing, strategies to deliver virtual supports. And so phase one was just total panic. The world was in panic. We were panicking, the clients were panicking. There was just a lot of urgent reaching out to clients, checking in, are you okay? Just reassuring, we're still here, we'll figure it out. And then this led into phase two, which was technology is our savior. Very quickly, okay, technology is the answer. It's the answer that will keep us connected with our clients. And then we needed to determine with our clients what technology they had available, what was appropriate to support their participation. And very much it was an individual process, case by case. What can a client use, what isn't appropriate. And then we needed to secure funding and actually purchase, for a lot of clients, we need to actually purchase the technology and deliver it to them. So then phase three became technology training, also known as the phase where us as therapists became IT experts, for better or for worse. And our clients are receiving new technology, and then we needed to, by necessity, deliver virtual supports to help them get it set up, teach them how to use it. This definitely presented a ton of challenges, and I certainly thanked a lot of my own clients for their patience with me as I was their IT provider during this phase. So then we enter phase four, virtual engagement. We've arrived, great. We have the technology. We're moving forward with treatment sessions. We're engaging in the virtual platforms. And then we started to realize that the virtual platforms were very, very different than the in-person treatments. This brought its own challenges. The increased cognitive fatigue we saw in clients, a Zoom fatigue, it's real. We found that virtual sessions, they take more concentration and focus. To be able to process the nonverbal cues, facial expressions, tone, pitch of voice, body language, having to focus on that during a treatment session so intensely, it really consumed a lot of energy. And then there was this Zoom experience of feeling that you need to perform on Zoom. Without in-person treatments, the treatment sessions, they became less organic and more of sort of a performance type session, which was very fatiguing in and of itself. And then what started emerging for some clients was this sense of altered self-image. Here we are on Zoom, and they can see themselves the entire session. And as they're dealing with changes in self-image, it brought forth some of those conversations, which we tried to use as a really positive therapeutic outcome. But we found that a lot of clients were shying away from any type of visual virtual session for that reason. So successfully at times and other times a little more challenging, we dealt with that one by one. And then there was the realization that just many treatment goals were just absolutely not possible to address over a virtual platform. A lot of treatment goals needed to be discarded, totally modified, and there's a lot of energy put into that. So as we're moving forward and we're realizing, you know, that things look different, things feel different, things take more work to get done, we enter phase 5, and this was just exploration of feelings of loss. There was, you know, without being there in person, the decline is happening. The rehab looks different, it feels different, and clients are now identifying that there's, you know, loss of progress towards, you know, the goals that needed to be left behind. There was this overwhelming loss of forward momentum with rehab programming. There was loss of relationships, and ultimately that loss of human connection that we all experienced. And for a lot of clients, it was worse for them. They experienced that loss of that human connection and the impact that has on our psychological, you know, sort of well-being. So we just tried to acknowledge the loss and then work towards acceptance of the loss, because with the acceptance, then we can look to move forward. So with moving forward, we enter phase 6, which was a reevaluation of expectations, because we are all adapting to different treatment modalities. I think we all noted during COVID, especially during the initial shutdowns, that we all sort of vibrated at a different frequency. Life felt like it was, you know, on hold, and this absolutely transcended into our rehab programming. And it changed the pace at which clients were moving forward with their rehab and the pace at which success was occurring. So just reevaluating the expectations of forward momentum, and then redefining goals, and even celebrating the small goals. Any small goal during COVID was really quite huge. For some clients, it meant that just realizing that just basic maintenance was progress in and of itself, because we weren't declining. And so we celebrated that. And then now we're here now, we're phase 7. I call it lucky number 7. And that's where we are now, where it's the rebuild. So things have opened up. We as a society, we have sort of new rules and a generalized playbook that for the most part allows us to get back out into the community and see people in person. So as an overall rebuild tool, we're trying to use our lived experience and the difficulties and the loss that COVID brought to us to create an appreciation for what was missing, and appreciation that we can resume some of that. And we're trying to use that appreciation as motivation for ongoing rehab. So as we've lived these transitionary phases and we're adjusting to these times, I think there's a few points that we can take forward, in that our trials and errors over the past several months have been really super successful learning of what works and what doesn't work. And with that, we can hang on to the elements that we know now work in the virtual world, and then we can build on those. We also now know that we can stay connected in a virtual world and during a pandemic. And we also know that we can still make progress in a virtual world and during a pandemic. So my hope is, if the future brings more lockdowns, is that we don't need to go back and relive all of the phases. We know what they look like. They came out of necessity, but we can just sort of go back to the good parts that worked. So one of the key elements that we saw as we were transitioning was really determination of what is an essential service. Even with COVID, we found that the in-person treatments for a lot of clients were essential, and the lack of those treatments were just absolutely detrimental for many clients. We monitored decline as a whole, but there was a different level of decline for certain essential services. And the most general guideline that we used was that if we don't provide this treatment in person, the client will decline to the point where they will be a burden on our healthcare system. And as that basic definition, we used to then come together as a team, lots of team collaboration, approach each client and each therapy case by case, and then determine at this point, to prevent further decline and being a burden on our healthcare system, what do we need to put back in person? And for lots of clients, we had to re-implement PSW care for essential personal care, many elements of physical therapy, because some of our clients were physically declining to the point where they might be a fall risk. And then the RSW support, Keith is on the panel, and I'm sure we'll speak to this, but most notably the RSWs were one of the most essential services. I often refer to RSWs as the glue that holds a great rehab team together. And COVID absolutely highlighted this. The RSW community, they provided some really creative ways to connect and support and keep our clients glued together. And that also included enhanced PSW support with the RSWs as well. And then, so we also found over this time that we started to connect with our clients differently. Pre-COVID, we would typically see, weekly or bi-weekly sessions, scheduled 1 hour, 2 hour session. But during COVID, we switched to, there's more frequent client connection was required. There were more mental health check-ins. And then we found that, if there was a 1 hour session, for example, scheduled for a client during a week, that breaking that up into 2 30-minute sessions allowed the client to engage better, manage cognitive fatigue, and it gave us an opportunity to connect with the clients more frequently as well. So then we come into this, a bit of an overlap, but as Dr. Hamilton said, just out of necessity, as we explore decline, decompensation, loss of structure, these fluid days that COVID brought to us all, it really just, what appeared for all of us was the necessity for focus on self-care. And for a lot of clients, it was self-care as a rehab goal. There was worsening of mood and depression, anxiety, sleep. It's a difficult cycle. So to manage that overall decline, we explored, establishing and maintaining a structured daily routine. We looked at sleep hygiene, nutrition, fueling your body with the nutrients that will fuel you, getting some form of gentle movement or daily exercise, these guided meditations, these types of things. A lot of rehab goals were then restructured in and around those. And so there's a lot of great links. Dr. Hamilton provided some amazing feedback there, and there's a lot of great links in the rehab toolkit. But from a treatment perspective, we actually found that exploration of self-care goals was really hard work for a lot of clients. They needed a good deal of support to structure the development of the goals, and with a lot of the follow through. To set up the self-care programs, in addition to the client contribution, because it's their own self-care, there was a great amount of team collaboration to determine what were the most appropriate self-care goals, and what self-care goals could be an extension of current rehab programming, just to create some consistency there. And then a lot of the rehab supports were developed to help the client actually engage and follow through. Independent management of self-care was really difficult. So we as teams collaborated and put in a combination of whatever was appropriate, but that combination of essential in-person support if needed, the video conferencing and the challenges that brought, telephone support, setting alarms and reminders. We relied pretty heavily on the virtual support of the Invisible Care smartwatch program, which I think the link is in the toolkit. And then the tracking tools, just for accountability and to help measure success, just to help show the clients that engaging in this, that success is possible and you are moving forward. So I'm going to leave with a few takeaway messages from our experience, if it can help others. But just some takeaway messages, first of all, for treatment providers out there. And that's our clients' needs. They remain unique. Meeting a client's rehab needs, whether it's virtual or in person, it definitely requires a unique, customized approach to meet the client where they're at. During COVID, for many, this meant meeting them in a declining mental health circumstance. But having the ability to recognize that the client was there, meet them there, and then to build rehab goals from that place to deliver practical and appropriate treatments was really practical for the clients. Team collaboration, more than ever, is really important. As we shift our priorities, we get creative with rehab goals, input from all the disciplines on, in a collaborative fashion. It's been instrumental to cohesively support our clients. And then there's the importance of foundation. Any rehab programming, really, where possible, I mean, it should be built from a stable foundation to see success. COVID crumbled the foundation for many. And all the time that we took during COVID to reevaluate rehab goals and to rebuild that foundation was time well spent. Increased mental health check-ins, very necessary. And I think they will remain very necessary in the coming months. And then closer monitoring of client progress, also necessary. Just reminding clients that any progress, however small, means that they are moving forward, even when that progress feels slow. So just a few important takeaway messages that I'd like to share for the clients out there. Number one, you are not alone. Even in the face of a pandemic, we've shown that it's still possible to stick together and to progress forward. It's okay to ask for help if you're struggling. We are here for you, and we have resources to help. We're all making this, our way through this together. And if your struggles feel new and unique, that's okay, bring them forward. You can trust your team. We're working really hard, to adapt our programming and meet changing needs, and we're learning what's working. So we would love the opportunity to bring that to you. So trust the process, even if the process looks different. And finally, for all the lovely clients out there, I want to say that you are worth it. All your efforts with self-care programming, as difficult as it feels, will lead to positive changes in your daily lived experience. I found that for a lot of my clients, engaging in the self-care programming became a challenge for them, and the root of it was that they didn't feel that they were worth it. And so we're here to say that all the effort you put in, even if it's small, worth it, because you are worth it. And so one final message before I actually have a legal question I'd like to pass off, but that is an overall message of resilience. And I think each person has touched on this notion already. And so as human beings, we are resilient. It's taken resilience for us to get through this pandemic so far. And when we look at supporting the ABI population through the rehab programming, we know that in and of itself takes resilience. Clients often wonder if they have it in them. And now we know that we do. So if there's one thing that our COVID experience has taught us, it's that we do have the resilience to adapt and to succeed. So I have a legal question, actually, if I could pass over to Matt, is some of the challenges that we've seen in the community. So as we review the changes that COVID has brought in terms of our limitations in being able to provide in-person treatments, and the decline that COVID has basically imposed on our clients, and the challenges that we see with participation and engagement in virtual rehab supports, we're noting that some insurers they're declining funding for certain treatments and supports due to the perception that it's a lack of participation by clients from both assessments and treatments. So like from a legal standpoint, what would you need from us as therapists to help when you're fighting with the insurance companies?
Thanks so much, Leigh. That's a great question, because we need you so much all the time. there has been, in the past 6 months, plenty of examples that you have, I have, David and Stacey have, Keith and Dr. Hamilton have seen, where benefits have either been suspended or denied because a client isn't getting to a part of the process that the insurance company needs them to participate in order to complete their assessment or evaluation. It's such a difficult thing to witness because of the fact that these individuals require this treatment and help, and often their injuries or difficulties and then having coronavirus impact them on top of that is what's prohibiting them from doing exactly what is required to ensure that those benefits remain ongoing, or to get to the next step where entitlement is approved for certain types of treatment or increased treatment because of those injuries. Suspended benefits are not new to us. Denied benefits are not new to us. That's what we do for a living. You know, but we get our swords from the treatment providers. That's where we get our ammunition to go against the insurance company to say why those treatments that are no longer being provided are still required. And so that's what I'll talk about, is just what we need from you for that ammunition. A lot of times insurance companies will use procedural ways to deny a benefit. So they'll take this book of rules and they'll go through it, and they'll look at the obligations of the injured party and what their obligations are in terms of providing information. They have a duty to provide certain information. They have a duty to fill out certain forms. I always say the insurance company wants you to ask them permission before you go ahead and do anything. So there are procedures to do that. And then there are also procedures that allow them to suspend, or even worse, deny benefits outright if those procedures aren't being followed. An example I can give is Section 55 of the Statutory Acts and Benefits Schedule, which is the big thing I just showed you, where if there's a dispute that's denied and us as lawyers want to go fight it, we won't be allowed to under certain circumstances. And one of those circumstances are when a client doesn't attend an independent examination by a medical practitioner from the insurer. So the insurer has requested a review or assessment of the client or the injured party because we've submitted, or you've submitted your report saying that something is needed, funding for treatment or attendant care, and they want to have an opportunity to assess the client. But our clients aren't going. Maybe they're not going because they're afraid to leave the home because of the coronavirus. Maybe one of their defense mechanisms is to avoid phone calls from case managers. Maybe one of their defense mechanisms is to, you know, say they're going to go and then just disappear at the last minute. It could be that assessments like this are triggers for them. So it creates increased anxiety on top of the anxiety they already have. And so we end up in a situation where they fail to attend an assessment that they're supposed to attend, which prohibits us from doing our job, which is getting those benefits either reinstated or allowing us to fight it in the first place. Leigh, what you guys do and what Keith does as a rehab support worker is exactly what we need you to do in those circumstances, where you call out all stops and you do your best to try to create a comfort level with that individual, whether it is through the need of assistive devices, personal support, you know, agreeing to take them to the assessment, coming up with virtual, you know, tech abilities so that they can do it via Zoom for certain components of it. Just being, you know, maybe giving them a phone call to remind them, cue them in the morning. That, hey, you have this assessment today and you need to participate in it. And when we have implemented those measures, we're seeing increased success in avoiding those issues. The soft touch at your level is super important with adjusters, speaking to them, advising them, hey, we've noticed these patterns since coronavirus or even before coronavirus that causes difficulty in our client moving through the process the way that your law tells you they're supposed to. And often you can come up with agreements or arrangements or rescheduling that will allow you to do that. The rehab support workers who have taken them to assessments have been, a very serious and successful way to work around that. Another thing is just doing your jobs the way you said, with, taking real consideration into how the treatment needs are different in coronavirus. For example, there may be an assistive device that was very helpful to them prior to coronavirus that is no longer helpful. There may be new assistive devices that can be implemented. And when those reasonable and necessary things are applied for, it allows us to show the real need for it, because there's a story behind it and we can use those stories to move forward. The good news is that if there is a suspended benefit, it's typically because information hasn't been provided yet. And there are two things lawyers can do under those circumstances. One is we can utilize your experience to get them to provide that information. An example may be we need their income tax records to apply for an income replacement benefit. And they haven't done their taxes for 2 or 3 years, and they're scared and they don't want to deal with it. Sometimes rehab support workers or PSWs or other people can take them through that process to help them get that information. And once we have it, not only does the insurance company have to provide that income replacement benefit, but they have to do it for the suspension period as well. That's a good example, I think. The most important thing that you guys do, though, is with all the stuff that you said in terms of suggestions, Leigh, is you put it in paper, you put it in writing. If it's not in a report, it's like it didn't happen. And I do have some suggestions of things that any treatment provider can keep in mind when they're providing progress reports or applying for a certain type of benefit or treatment. One is to highlight the differences in their world, pre versus post COVID-19. Say, hey, life is different for them. I have a client, for example, who had to leave the home and go to another home where there was a family support mechanism. Their attendant care needs are completely different because they're in a different home. You can be very honest about what problems have gotten worse, but what problems have gone away. There may be certain scenarios where the treatment is changing. We want to know long-term versus short-term status. As we all said, there may be a few months where things are less bad, but then they plummet. And we need to highlight those differences. Your phases are perfect. During phase 1, this was the type of requirements they needed. During phase 2, it changed. Every client's going to have different issues. Depression was one that was mentioned. Anxiety is a common one. Physical issues as well. Some of those are going to be heightened and cause more problems for them. And you don't want to just let the opportunity to tell the insurance company that things are worse go away, because later on there may be a need for increased treatment that needs to be supported based on those comments. Virtual versus in-personally, that was a great comment. And I do think I've noticed that too, is that we can use Zoom or other virtual video type computer options to allow us to get through this. So it may not cover all assessments, but it'll cover some of them. And documenting the need in the report is great. We did this part via Zoom because that's what we were capable of doing at the time. We may now need to do an in-person treatment because we are allowed to now, or the client feels less concerned because coronavirus is at a level of less numbers than it was previously. In your forms, filling out disability certificates or otherwise, keep in mind how coronavirus has changed in terms of their ability to either work or just live a normal life. If it's both, make sure to write down both. At the end of the day, we go to the License Appeal Tribunal to fight these benefits with what you provide us, and that will give us the tools and ammunition necessary. And I might take this opportunity very quickly just to mention some changes to the License Appeal Tribunal that have come out recently. We used to do long in-person catastrophic impairment hearings. Those have all been suspended and changed to virtual assessments until further notice. That you can bring a motion to reinstate it to an in-person once coronavirus theoretically has dissipated, but for the time being, they're going to be proceeding with these hearings. It's going to be virtual, and on a case-by-case basis, that may be good or bad for your clients, and they need to be prepared for that. I just booked a 7-day hearing for CAT in virtual scenario, and they're not doing this until September of next year. The delay from coronavirus has been significant and real, and that's something that the clients need to be aware of in terms of having a disputed benefit. And so progress reports are all the more important, because if there's a relationship with the adjuster and we document the changes in need properly, there may be a better chance to get those reinstated, at least until we get to this, get through the lag time and waiting to deal with the benefit with the hearing. So I'll give some takeaways as well, and then I'm going to pass it to David, who's going to talk about one of the newest and biggest and brightest swords and strongest swords that we have, that was provided by the Financial Services Commission of Ontario. But I would say your personal touch with the adjuster is paramount in first place. Let them know exactly what your client's going through on a case-by-case basis. Try to implement team approach as much as possible. If the lawyers are involved from the beginning, if the RSW is involved from the beginning, and the other treatment providers, and everyone is going towards a common goal, that's going to be reflected in how the file moves forward and how we can utilize that in our attempts to resolve a dispute. The clients ultimately, and our goal ultimately, is to resolve the case entirely so that they have some control over the funding. And so probably a really great reminder to them if they're struggling is to remind them of the final goal of all this is, hey, wouldn't this be great if we never had to deal with the insurance company again and we can have some control over where the funding goes? And so that should be the focus as well. Hope that answered your question. And David, I'll turn it over to you to chat about the fiscal bulletin and all the other smart things you know about.
Thanks. I'm just reminded that I'm really glad that this is being recorded, because the Pearls, Joanna, Leigh, Matt, Stacey, and Keith, I'm waiting to hear from you, are amazing. They're important. And I know from those who are participating today that there are a number of esteemed clinicians who have their own gifts and strengths, and they're using them, and credit to them and to the survivors and family members who've all tuned in to try and find out, is there something more? What can I do better? The ideas that come from talking about these barriers are something that we can use to help all of our clients. And to that point, Keith, I have to thank Stacey for her insight in inviting you. Truly a front person in terms of helping clients, survivors who suffered brain injury, and their family members to weather the storm, get through, overcome isolation. And Keith, I would really love to hear from you too, I think others would as well, about some of the ways you open the door for your clients in this challenging time.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Some very specific strategies that we've used. So looking at trying to engage, as already been talked about, some of our clients became very isolated. As the world became isolated, they became even more isolated, not leaving the room, playing video games for 12 hours a day, things like that, not showering, not having interaction with people. And so there was an initial reluctance to engage in this virtual world that we're now living in and continue to live in to some degree. I'm going to give you some very specific examples that we would use where we would get our clients outside. Because even if you couldn't go to the store, you could still go outside. There were still areas of just getting outside and being in fresh air was healthy. And so you all may recall when you were younger, you engaged in a scavenger hunt. And so we began with some of our clients doing what we would call scavenger hunts, but of pictures. So we would want them to go for a walk. Sometimes we would go for that walk with them, where we would walk somewhere else, staying near our house, and they would walk near their house and go into an area where they could take pictures. And we would make a list of 5 things that they would have to take a picture of, whether it be a bird or, something to do with another person or a car or a tree or et cetera, different ideas. And then we would put those in a collage together through some Zoom work. So that's a very specific way of getting them out, getting them engaged. The other one was in terms of hygiene. Some of our clients, hygiene became an issue. They weren't going outside, and so they didn't see a purpose of having a shower, etc. One of the things that we did was, because let's say we had an approved treatment plan for 3 hours 3 times a week, which meant 9 hours. Obviously, we weren't going and having 3-hour sessions. We would break those up, and I think, Leah, you made reference to that, about seeing and being engaged and being more, Zoom calls or FaceTime calls with the clients 4, 5, or 6 times a week, twice a day, etc. So some of the things we did was, before we're going to meet today, you're going to have a shower. We would also be doing check-ins on 3 or 4 times a day, even just 15-minute phone calls to make sure that they were taking their medication. Other things that we did were literally reading a book together. So we would get the book, and I would read a chapter, and they would read a chapter, et cetera, things like that. And then we would do some cognitive questioning regarding the book afterwards. Playing board games. There are board games that you can both have set up on the table, set Zoom. I don't know if any of you ever played a game called Sequence, but you could match play for play, or chess, et cetera. And those things were just getting the client active, getting them involved, having some conversation with people. And so we did that more often. We were engaged with our clients more often. And then we would also do things like giving them homework. 3 or 4 things that they would have to work on that we would want to prepare. And one of them that we were able to do is in terms of cooking programs. So we would design and order, have the food shipped, and we're going to do cooking. And then they would have to do some of these things in advance of our next meeting. You could take any one of these and open them up and make them different ideas. But really, the biggest part was just being engaged and being involved. Our clients are resilient, but they sometimes need us to help them be resilient. And so being more active with them, being engaged more times per week was very helpful. One last thing in terms of, we had a couple of clients that were referred to us that we began our support during COVID, and specifically when we started to open up. And our clients, as you can imagine, and I think Leah or Dr. Hamilton, you made reference to it already, was this whole thing of wearing a mask. And so what we would do is social distance at the initial part of the visit. We'd talk about the importance of the mask, and then we would both wear the mask so that we're keeping each other safe. But you didn't go in with the mask on. There was a period of time where you would sit, socially distance, obviously, and go from there. Some very specific examples, but you can create different things. The scavenger hunt became a very popular one with some of our clients, putting things together after that as well. Is that some very specifics that you're looking for, David?
Yeah, that's very kind, Keith. Appreciate it very much. And what it highlights to me is something that even this process of getting to understand through speaking with everyone, Joanna and Leigh, Matt, Stacey, and everyone at Vista as well, is that individuals have such different gifts, but such amazing gifts. And one of the things that I sort of reflected on and getting information from Leigh and Dr. Hamilton about self-care is that we're all looking for meaningfulness in our life. And when we're cut off from others, it's very difficult to feel that meaningfulness as much as we were when we were interacting with them regularly and being able to show them through using our gifts. Whether I have a severe brain injury, whether I be a family member of a person, whether I be a lawyer or practitioner, that, hey, this little bit of reach through something I know I can do, something I know I can share, some experience I've had, it makes me feel good to be able to do that, to have that communication. And so I think every day we probably all wake up and we think, okay, this is a bit odd compared to, but it's new and normal to get my coffee on my own and not get on my GO train and not see people that I know and not open the door for someone and frankly do a lot of nots. But if the ingenious thought in my day is there something I can give to somebody else that will help me feel a little bit more connected, then I think that helps me a little bit, and I hope that is something that perhaps helps us all. I know that just from the simple point of view that we have all of the attendees today who are interested in how they can give more, that we all have that motivation towards connection. And so the other issues that come up, I know, is that they're associated with the isolation that causes us to look probably too many times per minute, never mind per hour, per 24 hours at spouse or family members. And there is stress that we feel inside that we can't solve on our own, and sometimes it leaks out. So after I highlight some important legal options to clients, I'm going to ask Stacey if she can chat a little bit more about the resources that are available to those who are under stress and whose families are feeling the brunt of it. But for the moment, to Matt's comment and question about the important opportunities that are available to us legally now, just a few, and I think that some of them are old, made new, and more relevant. But Matt made the comment about how our clients are decompensating, and the best way to an approval is to help an adjuster understand that this better be approved in this form, or else this is what you're going to be facing with this client. Matt made the point, I don't need to go further. And FISCO, or FISRA as it's now known, has embraced the concern associated with isolation and said to insurers, basically, get real. People can't jump through all of these hoops anymore. You better find a way to say yes when there's a responsible recommendation being put forward, or else. And the or else is an important focus that I hate to go to, but just from the point of view of helping all attune to it, if I can just share screen with you for a bit, I'm going to show you a little bit of information that's also on our website. So I'll see what I can do here. If I can bring this up here. There's a piece that I'm going to show you that is attached, as probably some of you received this already. It's a survival toolkit. And without going through it in great detail, there's a list of contact information. Self-care resources, you'll find a lot of what Leigh and Dr. Hamilton were talking about there. First of all, just if I could ask Matt or someone just to share with me, are you seeing the screen with the survival kit on?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I found this very helpful to work through on my own. And just from the point of view of self-care, we all have our favorites sometimes, but from a mindfulness perspective, our meditation, I'm not so good at unguided meditation, but I really like some of the guided meditation. So here are some of the resources that I'm sure Leigh and Keith are helping their clients click on so that they can perhaps co-meditate together to get that space and sense of peacefulness that hopefully will come. We as Thomson Rogers have tried to put together, and we will often find in our first or other interviews that there are family members who are in need, or survivors who really at the beginning of their journey would like to know a little bit more about that process. So there are a number of books that we're glad to provide at any person's request to them to help them through their journey. And Stacey was very helpful to locate a few video resources here that we can recommend to you, having reviewed really what journeys have been taken by the people who have provided those videos. And as you mentioned at the beginning, Dr. Hamilton, we talked about Brain Injury Society resources, just an incredible indication of the gifts that people who give so much already have done to reinvent themselves in manners of support that are entirely mind-blowing to me, so that there can be connection despite isolation. And so there are many BIST resources, Toronto ABI Network resources, and just generally for thinking about who might be attending this webinar, but by all means feel the opportunity to share it with other brain injury associations. There are a great number of resources from other brain injury associations there that we've provided. And from a connection point of view with the day programs, the only thing that I've neglected to note here is that I am aware that there are various other private institutions, some of whom are attending today, and representatives of same that do provide private day programs, which I think are extremely vital and obviously have a ratio of support that is probably a little bit higher than we can find at some of the more publicly funded ones. But again, everyone's reaching out and helping meaningfulness develop. Caregiver resources, the caregiver burnout concern, I don't know, frankly, how family members manage through these last 6 months to bear this burden, but they can't do it alone, and they have to find meaning outside their support, because unless we are healthy, we can't be strong supports for others. And for us to be healthy, we have to pursue our own individual health as well. So hopefully some of these resources will be helpful. I'll let Stacey talk a little bit more about the other resources related to aggression that can also happen through a period of isolation and sense that the worthfulness of my life is interrupted by COVID or other reasons. This is the resource that Matt was talking about. It's just simply a summary of a bulletin that the government provided here. This is available on our website at a couple of different places. And basically, with respect to the reduction in services and clearly the reduction in accidents since this period of time, there's no question insurers' coffers are full and over brimming. And so they can't but remember to say yes, using their imagination and their sense of humanness to accept that your recommendations as strong treatment providers who do know the unique clients and their needs is the one that needs to be followed. So this provides a brief summary right here in terms of the obligations insurers have right now to allow email or phone consent rather than require the phones. So that personal connection that Matt talks about, the call to the adjuster, fills more of your day than it should, but it is extremely vital. And now there's some responsibility that insurers have to honor the comments that you're making to them verbally. They're going to relax requirements in relation to forms. Insurer examinations can be done virtually. Insurers shall pay for virtual care delivered by healthcare professionals, and they can still require OCF 18s. In terms of other comments about delivering direct care, insurers are obliged to pay for PPE as well, and that's an extreme expense. I know of a number of specialists out there, and including some who are listening in here, who managed to obtain those approvals. And one particular group of extremely innovative occupational therapists have been able to secure a very high proportion of yeses to PPE. So again, to those who have the courage to find a way to be in person, like Keith and others, you're just heroes for all of us. Attendant care, again, there's invisible care for sure, but the cueing and prompting that we find brain injury survivors are needing, and frankly are probably intuited more by family members and by in-person care, it can't be underestimated. And so we ask, and insurers are obliged to pay for that indirect care as well. So I'll leave it at that, but I don't want to underline, sorry, I've shown how many thumbs I have now, but I just wanted to end the comments here. I know we've gone for quite a period of time here, and I would like to hear, because I know caregivers deserve the resources. We're facing a return to school, Stacey, and I know that, at least for my household, and I'm dealing with 4 20-somethings, and Lord knows I should be used to the stress associated with returning to school, but it comes every year. So I'm sure for providers, I'm sure for all of us on this call who have children, survivors and family members, it's a time of stress, but there are resources available to keep that from boiling over. And indeed, where it becomes too much, resources for those people. Stacey, I'd love it if you could share those with us.
Thank you, David. And hopefully with some input from Keith, we're going to talk a little bit about that, as well as what I had touched on initially, which is the sort of one of the unfortunate sides of COVID is that there has been a spike in the increases in domestic violence within the home since COVID came along. And sadly, when I talk about this, the majority of the people affected are women. And when I was doing some research on this topic, I found that there was a recent Stats Canada survey that reports that 1 in 10 women today are extremely concerned about violence occurring in the home during COVID. And in fact, across Canada, there has been a 20 to 30% increase in the number of domestic violence calls that have been reported. And this has been attributed to a lot of different factors. We've heard about isolation, job loss, disrupted routine, fear, exacerbated mental health issues, and increased alcohol a consumption. But what happens when you combine this with a traumatic brain injury? And we know that people with traumatic brain injuries can have cognitive and behavioral problems that results in aggressive behavior that leads to violent outbursts. And sadly, we also know that people with traumatic brain injuries can be on the receiving end of violence and victimization, especially nowadays, right? And when you think about these people and their, especially ones with more severe brain injuries, with their inability to assess danger, inability to protect themselves, or make or remember safety plans. And when we talk about abuse, it's not just physical abuse, right? It's not just the signs that you would expect to see, unexplained injuries, bruising, defensive answers when you ask them about injuries. There's also the psychological abuse, right? And you'll see signs of people who have been psychologically abused. You'll see aggression, submission, withdrawal, constant apologies, perhaps destructive behaviors. And as Keith had mentioned, there's also the physical neglect, right? Hygiene issues, not changing clothes, not eating properly. So, you know, we have to, as a team who works so closely with these people, we have to look for the signs. We've got to listen to what's being said. And we have to let the clients or the caregiver know that there are options that are available to them. You know, I was with a client and his wife recently, and I had a chance to spend some time with both of them, and I had a chance to spend some time with the wife alone. And what I found when the husband was around, and he has a severe brain injury, you know, the wife was tense. She was always fidgety. She was walking on eggshells. Every time he said something, every time he had a request, I could just see it in her face and her body language, the way, you know, she would tense up or things would change. So he left the room and I had to ask the hard question. I didn't really want to do it. I felt kind of bad. Wasn't sure if it was within my scope, but I had to ask her, you know, is he being abusive to you? Are you and your son safe? And this guy is the most kindest, caring, doting husband until the light switch flips and he becomes terribly abusive. He calls her names. She becomes the brunt of the reason for everything bad and horrible in his life. And their son has picked up on these tendencies. And now their son, who doesn't have a brain injury, is treating his mother the same way the father is. So, you know, she said, no, he's not. There's no physical abuse. And then I asked her, I said, well, you know, are there thoughts of leaving? Like, how can I help? What can we do? And she said, you know, she can't leave because then she's abandoning him. He wasn't this way when they got married. And, you know, I get it. I really do, speaking, you know, from past experiences, that feeling of being trapped by your circumstances, feeling guilty, thinking, you know what, this isn't what I married. This isn't what I planned on having to live with, and thinking, you know what, I should go, but I feel guilty. Or I at least need a break, but I feel guilty because they need me and I need to be there. So in this situation, we were able to submit an accident benefits claim for the wife. So now she gets counseling independent of what her husband is going through, and she's not drawing down on his med rehab funds. I had another situation where, and we've used this word a couple times today already, with caregiver burnout, where the client's wife was the attendant care provider. My client was not catastrophic. It was a fight. But in the meantime, she's there 24/7 giving him the support, and she's got no assistance. So in her situation, we were able to, again, file an AB claim for her, document the file in such a way that we were able to convince the adjuster that my lady needed respite care. And through her med rehab benefits, we brought in an RSW to provide her with respite care. So she got out of the house, which was really just a workaround to get this guy the attendant care that he needed. Keith, as an RSW, can you just share some of the experiences that you may have seen since the onset of COVID in this regard?
I can. Our clients have become more reclusive. Some of our clients are reclusive, generally speaking, as we all have experienced with some of the people that we support, where they cocoon themselves away from the world. But this was kind of forced on them, and then they just used it to cocoon even more. We had a young gentleman that we were supporting who, it was a month into it, and literally, with the exception of coming out to go to the washroom, wasn't leaving his room. He was engaged in video games. He was in a deep cycle of depression. You know, all of his supports had been put on hold. He was resistant to communicating with the RSW even. So those are some of the things that we've seen. Another strategy that we used with this young man was, because he was so resistant to the RSW, and we got permission from the family we worked with, and we brought in 4 of his friends, and we set up schedules where they were going to do some FaceTime calls with them, and then we set some things up that were actively engaging between them. But reaching out and using people that the client might be a little bit more comfortable with. And I would be remiss, since I sit on the board of directors for OBIA, to mention the peer support program that's run through OBIA and the local brain injury associations. Sometimes people who have, you know, walking their steps, you know, we can try and be as compassionate as we can with the people that we support, but sometimes they want to hear and talk and experience and be involved with people who are walking the same walk that they're walking now. So I would really encourage people who might be resistant to that under normal circumstances. Now would be a really good time to find them.
Thanks, Keith. What about in terms of, you know, violence within the home, or, you know, increased aggression? I found that with some of our clients whose family members used to work, COVID hits, and now, as perhaps, let's use me as the example, now I'm home, I'm forced into the caregiver role because the PSWs won't come in, and I've got a brain injured spouse who is, you know, just not being a nice guy for a variety of reasons. Have you seen that at all? And do you have any solutions or suggestions for people who may be in those circumstances?
Well, the specific suggestions are some of the things I talked about. Where those situations that we're seeing where people are being aggressive or violent, and maybe it wasn't there before, maybe it was, but not nearly in terms of severity or acting out. You're trying to get them involved in other things. The cooking programs that I referenced, or going for walks, or doing pictures. We all used to have, not a lot of people got involved in photography in the past, but now we all have a phone, and those phones now have photography capabilities. I'm 10 or 15 of the people that we supported, the RSWs that I supervise, we're using photography as an outlet to get the clients out of the houses and get them involved in doing things. The reality is that the longer they sit and they stew in their environments where they're not feeling productive or engaged or active, that's where that acting out behaviors can come, where the aggression can come. So you really want to work hard to try and get them outside of those little comfort zones, or, you know, lack of comfort zones in terms of isolating themselves in their rooms, etc.
That's great advice. Thanks so much, Keith. David was showing the list of resources that we have put together, and there are a couple of sites on there that I found very informative. One of them is the Canadian Women's Organization, and on that site they detail a program that they're running called Shelter Safe. And there are 2 hand signals that I guess are now commonly being used. So if you have a client who's either the brain injured person who you suspect is in an unsafe situation, or a caregiver who may be in an unsafe situation, I think that one of them was, you know, if they go like this and, you know, they raise their hand at their thumb, you know, that's a signal that danger, or that they're afraid or something's going on. And the other one was sort of the closed fist with the thumb on the outside. So, you know, if there are people that you're working with who are in these situations and they don't feel confident enough to be able to pick up the phone and call you, or to reach out and call someone for help just because they're afraid. Little things like that, like creating, you know, a hand signal that they can give you that may help you. You know, is that the time, if I who goes like this, does that mean, you know what, I better get on the phone and call 911 because there may be an altercation brewing or there may be an unsafe situation. There's also online resources for safety plan for those who need it. I mentioned, you know, apply for accident benefits claims for family members who need the counseling. You know, document the negative impact that COVID is having on your clients and highlight their inability to deal with the stressors as a symptom of the brain injury, right? Not as a symptom of COVID. And again, take a look at the survival kit. There are local resources listed there for caregivers. There's a lot on the internet for caregiver burnout. I know I found the, I think it's FamilyServicesBC.org. They have podcasts, they have videos, they have books, they have blogs, and as well, there is a couple of places within Ontario as well that offer all of these services. The one in Ontario is the Ontario Caregiver Organization. It's got some great download resources on the impact of COVID-19 on family caregivers, as well as multilingual caregiver tip sheets, which I thought was really interesting as well. And just before I close off, Keith, do you have any other comments or suggestions that our group can sort of take away in terms of best practices in working with their clients during these trying times?
Be engaged, listen, give the clients permission to experience the discomfort they're experiencing and then talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Keith. And, you know, I echo what everybody else said, is that, you know, we all sit here behind our Zoom screens in our home offices, but it is the RSWs, the psychologists, the case managers. You know, you guys are the ones that are out there every single day, talking our clients down off that ledge, reeling them back in to their comfort zones, and at times pushing them outside of their comfort zones to get them to achieve their goals. So I think on behalf of Matt and David, myself, our PIA partners, you know, we're so thankful for having all of you involved, and especially to BISC for hosting this. I know we've gone on probably a little bit longer than anticipated today, but I think it's been a really important topic. And all of our contact information is on the survival kit tip sheet. And I can speak for David, I can speak for Matt. If there are legal issues, legal questions that you've come up against, or that you do come up against, and you just need somebody to bounce it off of, give us a call, send us an email. We always have the time for you, whether it's a file that we're not on. It doesn't really matter, because, you know, our main goal is to make sure that the clients that you're working with are getting the best service they can.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for wrapping us up with that. We really appreciate everyone's contribution to this presentation. It was very comprehensive and informative, so thank you so much. I just wanted to open up the floor to all of our attendees. If they had any questions or comments, please feel free to type in the Q&A box now. I have some comments here.
Yes, I'm remiss. I did not mention the OTs, Angela. Thank you for pointing that out to me. Sorry.
The OTs are also important, yes. Okay, so if there's no questions, we can move along. So I just wanted to let everyone know, remind them again that this webinar is recorded, and you can find it on our YouTube, as well as our, we can also email it to you directly if requested. And you can also find it on our website. It will go up shortly after this. It's called bisc.ca/webinars. So please find it there. As as well, I wanted to quickly just give another resource as well to support everyone through COVID. Just going to quickly share my screen here. Let's see. So here, if everyone can see, please visit bis.ca/online-programs. You'll find our updated programs and support services here as well for September. Okay. And I also wanted to let everyone know, please feel free to input your contributions in terms of letting us know what you want to hear about for upcoming webinars. We really value your input and we encourage you to contribute to the discussion. So please email info@bis.ca if you do have any suggestions for upcoming webinars.